Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome NAWB's Chief Executive Officer, the bigger, bolder, better Ron Painter.
Good afternoon. Buenas tardes. It is great to see you here. It is great to see the room full, as much of the room as I can see with the lights. I want to start by saying how many of you, lots of us are workforce professionals, how many of you have a hard time, you can raise your hand, have a hard time explaining to your mom what it is you do? Come on, be honest, you can be honest. All right. Well, I have the pleasure and the opportunity to show my mom a little bit of what I do. So if you will beg me a moment of personal privilege, ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce my mother. Get up. I did object somewhat when Selena put into the script bigger, bolder, and better. I try not to turn to the side so you guys can see, but a little more weight. I think it's the airport food that gets me. Many of you have been gracious enough to invite me to join you in your states across the country. I won't say how many miles, but the other day Southwest Airlines suggested to me that in Rapid Rewards program I could now fly the plane. So for those of you who are on Southwest, I would worry. But no. We're here. Not just at the Hilton properties, which seems like a long time ago we started to think about a major change. And you talked to us about being in the same hotel. You talked to us about all being in the same room, and I hope you get the impression that we are listening. But I think the other message that I want to deliver to you today is, as an industry, as workforce boards across the country, we are here. We are very pleased that over the next few days that the Secretary will be here, Hilda Solis, that the Assistant Secretary, Jane Oates, is going to be here for a conversation with Lori Moran, and that some folks from the administration staff will be here from the White House and from Capitol Hill. And you're about to hear one very significant business voice, and tomorrow you're about to hear another. We have come far in 18 months since we saw a zero in the House budget for workforce investment. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, the President of the United States said, we need workforce development in the U.S., and we need level funding in this budget. And that we owe to ourselves, because finally we are beginning to realize that we need to advocate for what we do and who we serve in our communities. What you do across the country in over 500 workforce boards is great work. As professionals, you are doing great things in challenging economic times, and we got to see some of that recognition with Joe Carbone, who I know is here in a great piece on 60 Minutes, talking about the passion that you all bring to this business. And many of you are moving beyond WIAs, just thinking about the numbers, and you're working on community strategies, and you're becoming a significant strategic partner to your local businesses. We have worked hard. I hope that you believe, I hope that you trust that we at NAWB, including the board of directors that Lori introduced, are working on your behalf and working hard. I am confident that together we can succeed. And when we succeed, it's not our personal glory. It is the glory for America's labor force and American competitiveness around the world. And that's what we get up and do. I hope also that you got the impression that as we were trying to build the agenda for the forum, that we did think about bigger, better, and bolder. Among some of the things that you're going to see is the lab, which is a central think tank for quick learning and information with industry experts, is also going to be a part of it. The exchange, which houses nonprofits, foundations, government agencies, and other partners that are important and support our work. The hub is our expanded exhibit hall, and we hope that you take advantage of meeting with the vendors, attending their demonstrations and activities that support our learning as industry professionals. Lori already told you we are going to record the industry briefings, which is another addition to our forum. So if you have film crews, if you see them around, please smile, check your tie and check the hair. We've also expanded the issue sessions with facilitators to record your concerns, your questions, and your policy suggestions. And you're going to see some graphic recorders. Jim and Joe are out back because we want to hear about your ideas. We understand that it's not about the status quo. It is about improvement. It is about innovation. We have to do better if we're going to have our communities do better. And we want you to help us share your innovative ideas so we can move the industry forward. There are challenges. I would be crazy if I didn't tell you that there are challenges ahead of us. WorkforceInvestmentWorks.com has helped us tell our story. We've learned more about data and how to turn it into information that benefits customers and policymakers. We've launched local and national efforts to better define the impact of our investments, and we will continue to get better at this part of our work. And you're going to hear about return on investment throughout the conference. We need to pause and know that our collective voice is bigger when we engage together and when we engage other partners like local chambers of commerce who have helped step up and raise their voice for workforce development here in Washington. We are better today than thank you. We are better today because we are learning more about data and how to rely on data for decision making. And we are bolder in our pride. The pride we take in our work, the pride we take in developing our partnerships, and the pride we have in ourselves as professionals. A good friend of mine recently sent me a card, and it was a quote from William James that said, "Act as if what you do makes a difference." We are making a difference. We are a part of the conversation in DC. We need to continue a strong voice to do that, and I ask you to join with me and the board in doing that. We cannot rest. We did something on Friday that was new for us at the forum as well, and we invited a number of our international guests to join us, and to talk briefly about that event, I want to introduce NAWB's past chair, Jamil Dada.
Ron, I don't know how much I can contribute to the better or bolder, but I can certainly help the bigger. My hair got bigger than last year, so Selena, I'm trying. Okay, thank you, Ron. This past Friday, as Ron mentioned, NAWB held its first International Workforce Day. This global dialogue for workforce excellence was a gathering of workforce development professionals, private sector WIB members, educators, policymakers, business leaders, Chamber of Commerce executives, and industry association stakeholders from around the world. Our special thanks to the Public Consulting Group for their generosity in sponsoring that event. Among the panelists were representatives from Great Britain, from Germany, the Netherlands, Canada, South Africa, Australia, Scotland, France, and Spain. And next year we're going to try to get the other 200 countries that we missed this year. But you can see the flags, they're posted back there, and you probably saw them as you walk in, and you can take a look at them. And we hope to have more and more each year. In addition, speakers from international corporations included those from UPS, from Monster Worldwide, and from Gap. Finding workforce talent is a critical challenge that we share with many other nations. Having this gathering of significant movers and shakers proved to be a positive step in sparkling new learning, new ideas, and fresh approaches that can tap into the global strength of those dedicated to workforce excellence. NAWB is proud to have played a role in the success of that. So thank you very much.
It is now my pleasure to introduce a gentleman to bring on our main speaker. I want to turn the podium over to Mike Steinmetz, who is Vice President and General Manager for a great partner in Manpower. Mike?
Thank you. Great job.
Thank you.
And pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker today, ManpowerGroup's President of the Americas, Jonas Prising. Jonas oversees all aspects of ManpowerGroup's $4.6 billion operation in the North, Central, and South America. Since joining Manpower in 1999, Jonas has held the position of Managing Director for Italy. He's also been the Director for Manpower Global Accounts in Europe, the Mideast, and Africa. And finally, he was President of North America. A highly respected expert in workforce development, labor market, and workforce. Let me introduce Jonas Prising.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. We are delighted to be here this afternoon. Let me start by saying, of course, we would like to give a great thanks to Lori and Ron for inviting us to speak with you and have a dialogue with you this afternoon. So what I hope to be able to illustrate in the next half hour or so is some of the changes that we are seeing occurring in the U.S. labor market, but from a first global perspective in terms of general forces that are occurring everywhere, and then diving down into some areas where you have world of work trends which are really true regardless of where you are in the world. And of course then translate that into the reality that we have here in our US environment. And also, as we go through this presentation, what I think you'll see is the critical role that your organizations play in this new human age. Because what we are seeing today is a mix of cycles, so cyclical changes, as well as structural changes. And sometimes it's difficult to see the structural changes because of the economic cycles. Many of the things that I'm going to be talking about today, we know have been going on for at least a decade. But they have been hidden. Both the good times were hiding some of the changes that we were seeing, as well as the bad times. And I hope to be able to shed some light on what those changes are, so that as you are providing your services in your local markets, you will understand that some of those changes that are why they're occurring today, but more importantly maybe where they will be going and what other things you need to think about in the future. So if we switch to our next slide, the ManpowerGroup is a company that was founded in the United States almost 65 years ago. And what I wanted to use the time to do here is really not talk about us as an organization, because as Manpower you have known us here in the US for a long time, but mostly to give you the illustration of why we have a point of view of what's going on in the world and what is going on here in the US. So we provide work on a daily basis to about 600,000 people. We meet 10 million people who are job seekers every year in 82 countries, close to 3 million people here in the United States alone. We also provide services and job opportunities for industrial and administrative job opportunities, but also we are the biggest provider of IT engineers as well as financial experts all over the world, and in particular here in the United States. We have activities that help people through outplacement move from one career to another career. So all of this to say that through our activities, we have a great window into what is affecting the world of work today, how it's been affected over the past years, and also where we believe it is going based on some trends that we are seeing. In terms of our activity, many of you may know that we are very active with your organizations in the workforce board area. So we have more than 55 senior members of the Manpower team active on your state or local boards, with more coming on every day and more interacting with you on a daily basis. And we do that because we believe that access to talent is going to be a critical question for organizations as well as nations alike. So with that as a background, let me start by giving a brief overview of some of the forces that really any organization in this room can recognize and should be aware of as you look out. So when we look at the world, we really see three main forces that are shaping many things in business, in society, in lots of different aspects of our world. So the first one is really this bifurcation between the emerging markets and the developed markets. So as you know, economic growth for the better part of a century has really, or more actually, probably close to 200 years, has been dominated what today are called developed markets. So mature economies in the West that have been the growth engine of the world. But what you would also have noticed is that after the recession came the time when emerging markets had a much shorter economic cycle and came shooting out the other side and are growing very, very rapidly. This is something we will continue to see. So this two-speed world where emerging markets are growing very, very rapidly and where developed markets are going to grow much, much slower right now as well as into the future is our new reality. A lot of this is based on population size, because when some of these emerging markets with their population sizes also become big consumer markets, that's when you're starting to see a true acceleration. And you're starting to see that already in some of the markets around the world. Earlier this week, I had the opportunity to address an audience such as this in Brazil. And I will come back to that a little bit later on, but it's remarkable how fast and how vibrant those economies are. And we know that this is something that will continue for the foreseeable future. And we also know that the slower growth environment, albeit now masked by a cycle, an economic cycle, which is still very difficult in many parts of the world, is not going to get us back to where we were before, even though it's certainly going to get better than what it is today. So this is one new reality. The other aspect that I think is a really important societal trend is this notion of bifurcation within society itself. Much of it based on skills. So not only here, but in lots of parts of the world, we have a situation where a certain part of the population has ample access to opportunity, has ample access to wealth creation, has ample access to jobs. But an increasing part of society has no access to those opportunities. Much of this depends on skills. Having marketable skills so that you can provide opportunities for yourself as well as provide for your family and contribute to society at large. So this is a trend that I think today, ideology aside, we have data that is clear and unequivocal here in the United States. But this is an equal trend all over the world, also in emerging markets. And I mention that because We talked earlier about emerging markets growing very rapidly. Emerging markets are growing very rapidly. But with that very rapid growth comes the same bifurcation in society. So when you think about China, with 1.2 billion people, 300 million people are benefiting from the growth in real terms. 800 or 900 million people are living in an agricultural society we would best recognize from the 1910s, maybe the 1920s. So this bifurcation of society is increasing and is accelerating actually in many parts of the world. This is true for developed worlds as well as for emerging markets. And it is an issue that we will need to address as societies because it creates, of course, social tensions. And the biggest example of this kind of bifurcation, of course, and the most recent one, you would recognize in the Arab Spring, where you have a large part of the population that is not participating in the growth of that economy, and eventually, with the visibility today that they have, because they can see what the rest of the world is doing, they rise up and they depose of those rulers that they had, and they try to take control and create a future for themselves. So I think it's important as we talk about this in the United States, know that this is a trend that exists and is very much accelerating, not only here, but in many, many parts of the world. Part of the reason it's accelerating is the last global force, which is all around technology and the role of technology in our lives. Innovation has really been part of mankind's history ever since we started. So the notion that technology equals innovation is true in one sense, but we don't think that this is the true driver of the disruptive changes that you're seeing. The real change that we are seeing with technology is really the speed. How quickly speed changes things between one geography and another. How quickly skills become less relevant in a very short period of time here in the United States as well as in other parts of the world. How medicine and aging is affected when you have access to information as well as to ways for understanding of how you can better take care of yourself, and how quickly this is affecting age spans all over the world. Because the population is aging at roughly twice to 3 times the rate in a number of emerging markets compared to the experience that we had over our revolution. And what does this mean? It means that many emerging markets have a rapidly aging population in a very short time period. And as you can imagine, most of those countries don't have any support system to support an aging market. So those are some of the global forces that we see affecting just about any business and any country all over the world. Now, our expertise is really in labor markets and what are those global forces doing to a labor market and the world of work. And I think this is where I'd like to spend a little bit more time now talking about the 4 trends that we have identified that we believe are going to be major drivers of change over the coming decades, and maybe 15 years, but some of those trends, as I mentioned earlier, were already present and driving change underneath a structural change for the last decade. So let me start with the first one, the talent and the skills mismatch. And I'm sure as you work in your close to 3,000 locations, as well as within your local operations in 500 locations, you interface with employers, and many of you are also part from the private sector. You hear from companies here in the United States that they have difficulty finding people. And of course, this is the very frustrating paradox where you have many people unemployed, and yet you have difficulty finding the right talent to fill those jobs. You read about it in the papers. Let me step back for 1 second and talk about this from a macro perspective. There are 2 reasons you would find this talent and skills mismatch. For most of the developed world, the reason is and will be demographic. What you might not know is that in Germany, Italy, Russia, Holland, and notably Japan, you have demographics of an aging population. In Japan, in the next 10 years, one worker will support 2 people in retirement. The biggest driver in those markets to a talent and the skills mismatch is going to be the lack of talent, people. The population is shrinking. Italy's population, and Mike mentioned earlier, I had worked there prior to coming here to the United States. Italy's population peaked 5 or 6 years ago and is declining. Birth rates in many of the developed countries is below 2.1, which is the birth rate that a nation needs to sustain a level of growth, keeping pace with deaths. Italy's birth rate is 1.3. No culture has ever recovered from a birth rate that has gone down so low. So Italy, in order to have opportunities or have the economy grow, needs to adopt policies around immigration. So this is true for the developed world. For the developing world, some of the countries that you think about as rapidly growing in terms of population, such as China or Brazil, have actually growth rates of their populations which are coming down significantly. China, in the next 20 years, will peak at about 1.3 billion inhabitants, and will be bypassed by India, who today is its second largest nation. Between China and India, as you may know, more than 30% of the world population resides in those 2 countries. But China will peak within the next 20 years and will be overtaken by India, who will have about 2 billion people eventually, before we believe that they will start to peak as well. So India, we believe, demographers believe, will be the biggest nation within the next 30 years, and China will peak at 1.3 billion. So even emerging markets have demographic changes that are very significant. And as I mentioned earlier, the biggest challenge there is the rapidly aging population and the rapidly increasing lifespan of a population in a very short period of time. So those are 2 extremes, and I think if you saw the coverage today from Japan, and you looked at the areas that 1 year ago were stricken by the terrible tsunami, one thing that strikes you in those pictures is the face of an aging population. And Japan is one of those countries that also has very stringent immigration legislation and no desire really to add to their population by allowing immigration, which is going to start to affect their ability to grow. And some would argue that the last 2 decades of the Japanese very slow growth or decline of their economy is really a managed decline as a nation, as their population is slowly declining. And most young people in Japan will, in surveys, say that the times that their parents had were the best ones, and that they do not believe that they will be able to achieve the same kind of wealth and opportunities as their parents had. But that brings me, of course, to the country that we're in, our nation, United States. What's the situation in the United States? Why do we see a talent and skills mismatch? What's very interesting is that the United States is the only major developed country that does not have a demographic issue. We have no demographic issue. Our population is growing, our birth rate is above 2.1. So we are in a very fortunate position to have enough people coming into the workforce and coming into the population for the foreseeable future and act as a supply of people entering into the workforce and thus sustain our growth and our way of life. What we do have in the United States instead is a mismatch based on availability of skills. So we have issues around education levels, high school graduation, lack of a pipeline of people going through vocational skills and technical skills, and that is in parts driven by demographics in some of those areas. Because of course those people coming into the workforce may be graduate ready at whatever level, but they are also in many cases not work ready. And of course having a high school dropout rate to the tune of maybe 30 or 25% and even higher in some of our metro markets is not going to be a sustainable situation for us. Because I know this, well-paid, low-skilled jobs will not thrive and will just continue to go away here in our country. So we need to have policies and opportunities for the people that don't have an education to ensure that we bring them into the workforce. And this is, of course, the reason why you're all here today and in the coming days, to understand how can this better be done and the important role that you have in connecting that talent with the opportunities of today as well as in the future. Because it will be a critical task for us. Because the effects that we will feel by not having people participating in our workforce and in our economy are the same as not having a good demographic profile. And we have great demographics, but we have an increasing gap between the skills that are required by employers and the skills that our educational system is providing. So we need somebody, some activities to make sure that we create that bridge between those that don't have the opportunity so that they can participate in those opportunities, because it is a matter of national interest and of vital importance. Because companies and jobs come to the United States and create jobs because they know that they can find a great workforce here. So it is going to be very important that we add and bring those capacities to everyone in the population. If we then look at the next part, which is really around the notion that in a world where skills are scarce or getting more scarce, individuals will have choices. And just before we started our session here this afternoon, we talked at the back a little bit about the notion that the generations are different and the expectations are different, and this new generation is very different and has different expectations than previous generations. And I would say, of course, that's true. It's always been true. I read an article not too long ago which talked about the younger generation being much more selfish, much more focused on their development, much more focused on spending time with their families, and really thinking about themselves ahead of thinking about their company. And all of you may be nodding, and many of you are saying, yes, I see the same thing. Well, this is an article written in 1982. Every generation looking back, looking ahead, seeing the next generation says, okay, I can't believe they're doing this. So don't make any mistakes. Yes, some of us of an older generation look at the younger generation and are saying, well, you can't behave like this. How's this all going to work out? Well, and it turns out it works out really well for the most part. But what happens, and what we do have to recognize, that this is the first time we've had 4 generations at work. And what we also have to recognize that this is the first time that we've had to manage within organizations, workforces that within work have different expectations and situations that they deal with, but also, of course, generations that act in different ways. If you think about it, all of the generations up until the Y generation have really been geographic generations. So the generations from my native country, the baby boomers there in Sweden, are different in some of their behaviors and expectations than would baby boomers be here in the United States. But the Generation Y will be the first true global generation, where attitudes and expectations, as we look at our surveys, are really converging because they communicate across a much, much broader and a global spectrum. And many of you who have kids at home, they're gaming. They're spending more time gaming than they're spending time watching TV. On average, parts of the population spend more than 3 hours a day gaming. And when they game, they play with other people, doing different things, and I'll come back to that in a little while as well. I spoke earlier about the power of technology and how it really accelerates change. The fact that we have new tools, new apps, new social media, things like that, clearly are innovations, but innovations is not the novelty. The novelty here is the speed of change and how quickly it changes. In the world of work, of course, job boards replace classified ads. Social media replaces referrals. It's a much smaller group that you're talking to when you're looking at this. So things are evolving very, very rapidly. Technology also means that there are many different ways now that work gets done. It can be done on location, off location, virtual. in many, many different ways. And the younger generations interact with technology in a much, much different way than we do, which is going to have profound impacts on the workplace and on the skills that they need. And last but not least, the changes that we see in organizations and how they are constantly striving to do more with less is a feature that we're observing all over the world. When you hear about the jobless recoveries, what a jobless recovery means is that companies do more with less. It's as simple as that. Manufacturing has lost 30% of its jobs over the last decade. We used to have 17 million people working within manufacturing. We have 11 million people working in manufacturing today. The output from the manufacturing sector is going to be higher today, and this year, the manufacturing believes it's going to be at its highest level ever. With 30% less people, we produce more products than we did 10 years ago. So our manufacturing sector is tremendously strong, with great productivity, and is extremely competitive. As a matter of fact, a recent survey by McKinsey talked about the changes between productivity increases, the wage inflation in some of the emerging markets that we're seeing, which is around 15 to 20%. I mentioned Brazil earlier. For the right skills, wages go up by 15 to 20% a year. It's true for India and it's true for China. So between 6 months on a boat from China, wage increases that have been at that level for the last 7 and are projected to be at that level for the next 10, that's why you're starting to see manufacturing come back to the United States. Within 5 years, we will be competitive in the manufacturing sector here. The jobs that are gone are well-paid, low-skilled jobs. The jobs that are here are highly skilled jobs and very well-paid jobs as well. And that is the first part of the structural changes that you're now hearing difficulties in terms of finding people. Because the skills that used to be providing their services to the manufacturing sector are no longer the ones the manufacturing sector needs. And that's why you find this frustrating dichotomy between people that have opportunities in terms of jobs and the skills that are available in the labor market. So if those are some of the trends that we're seeing, the question then, of course, is so what? So what does this all mean? What's going to change? Let me cover 3 of them. And I think from these 3, you will see where you play a critical role, and which is why we believe these organizations and your function is going to be so vital in making sure that we go through this transition into the human age as well as we can. The first one is work models. So you see here a number of different areas that are going to be changing. So how work gets done, how people organize themselves is going to be very, very different. We believe that many companies are starting to realize it's difficult to find people. So the old models of bringing talent in is going to change. So businesses, private businesses, need partners that help them identify where they can find talent and how they can make sure that they have the right skills. It is going to be a huge driver of how they act in the future. In terms of people practices, you're going to see companies think about talent in a very different way. Once we get out of this cycle, which will take time and is already taken more time than any other recovery that we've seen over the last 50 years, but once we get through it, and we will, you're going to start to see that the structural changes we talked about today means that for companies and countries, having the right talent is going to be critical to their success. And they will need, and they will ask for help in bringing people to their organizations, but also do everything that they can to retain them. Because skills, retaining the right skills, is going to be critical for organizations of the future. So how companies think about that, organizations think about a comprehensive workforce strategy in terms of retaining as well as attracting people, how they build an employer brand, all of those things are going to be extremely important. But of course, last but not least, where you find people, how you can identify sources of talent that may have been left in the recovery, in the early stages of the recovery, and how you can tap into that talent and make them come into the workforce is going to be critical. Because we can't afford to leave people behind. Our nation's growth and the ability of companies to find the talent is going to depend on being able to identify talent sources that we are not utilizing to the extent that we need and that we have to in the future. And when you think about the employment rate, and the unemployment rate you saw on Friday stayed about the same at 8.3%. Let's make no mistake about what's behind those numbers, because it's an average number. The average number says nothing. What's underneath the average number is an unemployment rate of about 4 to 5% for those that have skills, and 16 to 18% for those that don't. What's also behind those numbers is that there is a 40% of those unemployed have been unemployed long term. And we know that those are the individuals, the talent, that is the most difficult to get back in. And also behind those numbers is a youth unemployment rate that at a global basis is higher than it's ever been. And also here in the United States, it's a very high number, up and above over 20%. And then, of course, when you look at skill levels within the youth unemployment, you see the same disparity between those that have skills and those that don't have skills. And that's why at ManpowerGroup, for instance, participating in the Youth Summer Jobs program, which I know many of you are so involved with, is critical because we give exposure to youth about what the world of work is like. And if you look at other nations who have been successful at navigating this difficult and these sometimes very stressful structural changes, those that have structured programs to involve youth at an early stage, so they understand expectations of employers, so they understand what it's like, so their choices in education means they stay in education, and that you have incentives for them to stay. Those are the countries that have navigated this in the best way and that have the lowest youth unemployment numbers. So those are the things that companies are increasingly going to be focusing on because, and I can already see this as I speak to organizations and companies around the country. I'm starting to see, albeit still anecdotally, companies that are very focused and are partnering with workforce boards, with educational institutions in a completely new way. They are trying to secure their talent pipeline of the future. Some of them go into 4th grade. Some of them go into high school to explain that manufacturing environments are not what it is that you think, and you can actually earn a great living. Some of them are partnering with vocational schools and technical colleges to start tackling the pipeline they know is not going to be enough. If you think about it, these sort of non-offshoreable jobs are a lot of the vocational skills. Welders, plumbers, machine operators, well-paying jobs onshore have to be done in one geographic location. Yet we also know that the pipeline that we have through those colleges is insufficient because that part of the demography within companies, they are going to retire. And many of them are retiring. The companies that realize that are starting to partner in very, very different ways. And we believe that is the way of the future. Finding new ways to bring the partners on the labor market together so that you can guarantee two things. First of all, you bring in the talent that has been left behind and make sure that they can be positive contributors to economic growth and make contributions to society. And second, you are tapping into an unsourced and underused talent pool so that you can bring them in and also contribute to the success of the organizations where they will be working. So I hope with this brief overview, I have given you some of the reasons why you're seeing the changes that are starting to manifest itself here in the United States that are structural and hidden still by a very tough economic cycle. But as we get and continue to get out of the economic cycle, you will start to see some of these structural changes really coming up. And as you, I'm sure, are experiencing already, some of your organizations and some of you are already feeling some of this dichotomy and this paradox between how can it be that we don't have the or the people that we need with the skills that we need and that the organizations are looking for? And this is why, just as I said at the beginning, you have such a critical role. You're in 3,000 locations. You understand what those people's needs are and what their skill sets are. So your ability to take that understanding, that data that Ron was talking about earlier, and translate that in partnership with organizations so that they can acquire the skills that they need is going to be critical. And no one is going to be able to play that role better than all of you here. That's why we at ManpowerGroup are working with you, because we know the client side, the company side in terms of the skills, and together we are able to bring people back into the workforce and make our nation stronger. So with that, thank you very much for your attention this afternoon, and I'd be delighted to take a few questions. Thank you. And I know somewhere there's a mic or two wandering around. Do we have any questions about the presentation or other questions around the labor markets?
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, I have a question. You stated
There.
that we have an adequate labor supply in the United States, yet demographers tell us we have a third less 18 to 30-year-olds than we did 20 years ago. What is that discrepancy?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? We have a good demographic profile, yes?
Yes, and it's telling us that we in the United States have a third less 18 to 30-year-olds than we did 20 years ago. But yet you're telling us that we are going to have an adequate labor supply. I'm a little confused.
Yeah, I'm not so sure that we have 30% less 18 to 30-year-olds, because our demographic and our growth in the population is actually strong. So, you know, there's no shortage of people coming into the workforce. And of course we have an aging population, so the cohorts as a percentage are moving up. But the actual supply of people is keeping pace with population. So population growth is positive, which means we have more young people coming in and replacing those that grow older. Now, sometimes where the confusion lies is in the percentage of the age cohorts within the working population. So, of course, when you have a bubble and a boom of boomers, those percentages shift. But at the same time underneath, you continue to have good population growth, and you continue to have people come into the workforce. So we actually don't have an issue with people coming into the workforce. We have an issue with people, number one, not participating in the workforce. So some of you may know that our workforce participation rate is very low. And you also have the issue of the skill levels of those that are coming in. So the skill levels make it such that they don't have and are not participating in the workforce to the same extent that previous generations have done.
Can you hear me, sir? More people worldwide are now able to buy manufactured goods.
Yes.
However, because of robotics, are more people going to be employed in manufacturing?
Well, I think there is clearly we're not coming back to the 17 million that were employed within manufacturing. But I think if your impression is that manufacturing is a dying industry and does not create jobs, both the last 2.5 years as well as future trends would say, no, there's going to be jobs growth in manufacturing in the US. And it's going to be highly skilled jobs that are growing here in the US, because lower skilled, low-skilled jobs, lower skilled, low-paid jobs, they are going to be done somewhere else. Now, the question is, are we going to make back the 6 million that we lost in terms of jobs? No, the answer is no. But I believe that manufacturing can still be an important contributor to jobs growth, because remember, manufacturing creates one job in itself and creates 2.5 jobs in support industries. It has the highest coefficient of collateral job creation than any other industry. The healthcare industry will, of course, be one of the biggest growers in terms of job creation. No question about that. It's a demographic issue. As we age as a population and we live longer, you will have more jobs within the healthcare sector. So for those that think that the healthcare jobs are going to decline or going to stagnate at some point, you just have to look at the demographics to know that that's not true. And it will be a huge jobs driver. But the job creation as an effect of healthcare is relatively small. Manufacturing will continue to grow, but will not come back to the levels that we have seen before.
Good afternoon. Jamison Mannion from Richmond, Virginia. Very good presentation. Thank you.
Thank
I had
you.
one question on your recommendations. Under the people practices, you said balance the push-pull method of development and management.
Yep.
Could you speak more of that, please?
Yes. So the push-pull method, when we talk about the individual, it is clear that individuals will have to own part of their development. If you accept what I said as being true in terms of the speed of change, as an individual, I am responsible for making sure that I have marketable skills and that I keep up a life of lifelong learning. So I have to pull and ask for the opportunities to develop myself. At the same time, especially with certain parts of the population, we also have to make efforts, and organizations will make efforts, to provide and push opportunities for development and training that are going to be necessary to get into the first level of participation in the workforce. So I think those are going to be two things that are going to be very, very important, both to provide access to and ask people to participate, but as individuals also own the realization that you do need to push, and it is your obligation as an individual to stay marketable and desire those kinds of opportunities. And we believe, and that's what you see in many of the jobs that are in very hot demand right now, people move when they feel they don't develop anymore. So one of the primary reasons for people jumping ship in many of the organizations is not only increased pay, which in some cases is relatively stable, but the opportunity to develop and acquire new skills and expertise, which in turn makes them more marketable at a higher price.
Ken Phillips from the Los Angeles, California Workforce Investment Board. If we collectively made you king of workforce,
That's right.
one of the priorities that you have, or the only priority you have, is trying to do more for less. What would be that one thing that you could give us some guidance on?
Sorry, could you repeat that? I had the
worries.
help that was telling me that this was it. There was one more question, and you were it, Keith. So
Right.
between that confusion, I am now 100% focused.
So many of the workforce centers are trying to do more for less, and this year could be even lesser.
Yep.
What would be that one thing that you would help us do this year as a key priority?
In terms of the more for less, I think what is really important is going to be understanding the impact of technology on the workforce and the skills, the new skills that this is driving. Because one of the big changes is hard skills are going to be very important. But increasingly, organizations look for softer skills, collaborative skills. If you remember when I talked about gaming, and how gaming is now replacing TV. So it's all fun and it's a different thing. The implications to the workforce, as those generations come into the workforce, are tremendous. The most innovative companies today, as they recruit or train and even do work, are adopting gaming techniques. And what do gaming techniques mean? It means you're working relatively remote. You don't have to be working within a physical group, but you are collaborating to an extent that most of us in this room can't even start to comprehend. And you're collaborating and obtaining a result which is significant. So, understanding that and preparing the workforce for these changes and being aware of the technologies that are coming and how they will transform the world of work is going to be crucial. because those are the kinds of skills that the people coming into the workforce will need, which means that you as organizations will need to be able to advise them on what changes are coming as you guide them and bring them into the workforce again. So that would be my recommendation. Technology is moving much, much faster than most of us can keep up with. So I also think that how you manage as an organization to reach more people and help more people is in large part aided by technology. And mostly, though, which makes it difficult, is that it's disruptive change. So you actually have to change your models. You know, the one-stops using and leveraging technology in new way means that they will have the ability to reach and help many more people in the future. And even those that today maybe don't have access, if you think ahead, many of the people in the populations that we serve are going to be using technology and cellular mobile technology, for instance, to a much greater degree than what we've ever seen before. Thank you. So with that, thank you. Thank you, Laura. Thank you.
Great job, Jonas. I want you to know how much I enjoyed his remarks, so much so that I have sent my second tweet. And yes, for my friends who are out there in the audience, I took his words literally. I did believe in collaboration, and I do want to thank Josh, who is our technology genius on the NAWB staff, for making sure I knew how to tweet correctly. Just a couple of announcements before we break. There is so much happening in D.C., and I'm not talking about what some of you did last night. There is so much happening in D.C., and we want you to understand the issues. Ron Painter will be here on Tuesday morning at 7:45 before our opening session to share insights on the D.C. perspective. So that's not in your program book, but that'll be Tuesday morning at 7:45. Be sure to visit the Data Lab on the concourse level to get your complimentary performance reports. Join us for dessert in the exhibit hall up until 1:45, so you still have time to go, and we will see how much prestige I have in this conference. If there is chocolate, I will know I have clout within AWB. And after you've enjoyed your dessert, professional staff and executive directors head for the staff development session starting at 1:45 in International Ballroom East. Board members should plan to attend the board development session, also starting at 1:45 in International Ballroom West. And do not forget, tonight we have the exhibitor reception where we'll party in the hub starting from 6 o'clock until 7:30. Hope to see you around later this afternoon. Thank you.